Hi, this is Carrie Brownstein.
This is DJ Premier.
This is Darren Aronofsky.
You got the RZA right here.
Rose McGowan.
Radiohead.
Aisha Tyler.
Tribe Called Quest. Fred Armisen.
Prince Paul.
Javier Munoz. Seth Meyers.
Frankie Cosmos.
Flying Lotus.
Hi, we're Chaim, and you're listening to the Talk House podcast.
What's up? What is up? I'm your host, Elia Einhorn. Welcome back to the Talk House podcast. We have an incredibly special show for you today. Judd Apatow in conversation with David Duchovny. Joining me to introduce this episode,
Nick Dawson, editor-in-chief of Talk House Film, longtime fan of both these gentlemen, and psyched that we have such a great talk with these amazing men.
This great talk was recorded live at the incredible Murmrr Ballroom in Brooklyn in collaboration with Park Slope's Community Bookstore.
And this is part of the Murmrr Lit series, right?
Yes, speaking of which, tune in next month, listeners, for another episode from that series where we present George Saunders and Dana Spiotta in conversation.
It's always been great working with Murmrr. I know they were so helpful putting this episode together. And I know you've also done some really cool stuff with them outside of Talk House.
Yes, when I was curating Pitchfork's Inside Out series, I brought in Bjork, Nile Rodgers, and Tori Amos for different events there.
It's a very cool lineup.
Yeah, and it's a really cool setup. Murmrr actually shares its space with an active synagogue.
As you can hear Judd and David refer to in their conversation.
Yep.
And looking at the schedule, they have some really cool events coming up with Josh Ritter, the Secret Sisters, Moom, and Tindersticks, which is kind of like
Tindersticks are coming back.
Bands that I have loved for many years.
Amen.
What brought today's talk together is in many ways the connective tissue between David Duchovny and Judd Apatow, which was Garry Shandling, the late, great comedy legend who was such a formative figure for many comedians coming up through the industry, as Judd was. And through particularly the Larry Sanders Show, connected with so many people in entertainment, including David Duchovny. And the reason that they were talking about him and hold him in such great reverence is that not only was he a comedy genius, but he was also somebody who was, you know, a great mentor, a great friend to so many people, and a really fascinating person. Like his Buddhism in particular is something that they focus on quite a bit. And his work and his life were really defined by a wisdom and introspection that was very rare.
Shandling came up in the industry as a stand-up and writer for television shows like Sanford and Son and Welcome Back, Kotter in the mid-'70s, but he didn't really become a household name until his sitcom It's Garry Shandling Show, which debuted on Showtime in '86.
Yeah, in his conversation with David, Judd talks about how with It's Garry Shandling Show and the Larry Sanders Show, his TV show in the 90s, he kind of gave everything of himself. Like he just put all of him into those shows. And they are these, you know, incredibly complete and amazing and very different comedic enterprises that made Shandling this enormous star. I mean, for me, the Larry Sanders Show and Seinfeld were sort of like the pinnacle of mainstream comedy in the 90s. And I just remember sort of marveling at the fact that cerebral, provocative, sort of envelope-pushing comedy could be as widely embraced in the US as it was.
Shandling passed away in 2016, and Judd has really been memorializing him since. At first, that took the form of the HBO documentary, The Zen Diaries of Garry Shandling, that followed his life and career and was based on his personal diaries. Just last year, It's Garry Shandling's book came out that was edited by Judd, who also wrote an introduction. And the book includes some of Shandling's journal entries, photos, and contributions from Shandling's peers.
If you watch enough documentaries about Hollywood, you'll come across stories about Shandling's basketball game that he would have at his house. And it's great because we get to hear some lovely stories about that. But he was somebody who just really welcomed this really wide range of people within the comedy community into his life and just was somebody who really included others.
It was very powerful to hear about the personal relationships that both Judd and David had with Garry.
Yeah, David talks about introducing him to yoga and boxing, and we get some amazing stories there. I mean, for me, like the thing that comes through, which I already knew about him, is that A, he was this incredible joke writer, but also when Judd is reading some of the diary entries that he wrote, I mean, there's incredible wisdom there.
There really is. One thing that was really neat for me in this talk, Nick, was getting to hear about how both Judd and David first met and connected with Garry.
Judd talks about, of course, we know him as the guy who did 40-Year-Old Virgin, Knocked Up, This Is 40, and more recently he's producing stuff like Crashing and Love. But back in the 90s, before anybody knew who he was like this precocious, brilliant joke writer who Shandling took under his wing. And we heard some great stories about them working together on The Larry Sanders Show, and also when Garry Shandling was presenting the Grammys one year, which is the moment that they first really connected.
And then David Duchovny is, of course, the star of Californication. And before that, The X-Files. A great story there is that David brought Garry Shandling on to play himself on the show.
Yeah, which is hilarious. And apparently, according to David anyway, when they first met, Garry had absolutely no idea who David was, even though David's people had told him it was the opposite. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. There's so many great stories in this.
Should we roll the tape?
Let's roll the tape.
It's nice to be at Temple with you, David.
It's kind of a dream come true.
We all knew it would end here. What are we going to do? I have to time this so that we...
Are you recording this?
I always record everything. I'm a hoarder. That's why we made the book. How do you want to do this, David? We haven't really planned it.
Well, that's apparent now, isn't it?
It's kind of a Garry thing to do, to try to be in the moment and not really plan it and just see how it feels.
You know, once I was in Gary's kitchen, and remember that leather satchel that he had, that big bag that he would carry around? It had about $10,000 worth of cash in it. I know that. But I got a glimpse inside it, and it was so hectic and filled with odds and ends of life. And Garry saw me look inside the bag, and he shut it, and he said, no. You're not supposed to see that. So we can start there.
Why do you think he needed $10,000?
No, I just made that up. But Garry always had cash, didn't he? He always had a lot of cash.
He was a cash guy.
He liked to have cash.
Now, David and I met at Gary's basketball game when we were doing the Larry Sanders Show. Garry wanted to play basketball to, have a world of friends separate from the stress of his work.
Yeah.
In a way, it was almost like recreating something he wanted in childhood that maybe he didn't get. And I would call people up in the beginning and try to get them to show up. I think we also knew that George Clooney had a game, and we wanted to be like George Clooney.
Yeah, we wanted to be better.
And then David showed up, and David really can play basketball. You played for Princeton, right?
Not like Clooney.
Yeah, not like Clooney. He's very good. And I remember when you showed up, and it was scary because you know how to play and
the nerve.
And then Alan Zweibel, who created It's Garry Shandling Show, fell on me once and dislocated my shoulder, and I never played again.
It's good times. I remember Garry used to just go over the rules. Of course, Wayne Fetterman was the commissioner.
Yes.
But Garry had the rules, and the last line of the rules was, "And my head is in."
It was always about not getting hit in the face. That was an important part of any show business basketball game. Sandler always says that. He's like, don't hit the face. The face is the money.
Sandler's oddly physical out there, though.
Yeah.
He's a beast.
He's more serious than...
He likes to work in the paint.
It was also a weird game because it would change who was playing every week. And like one week you're covering Clint Black. And the next week it's Brad Pitt.
Yeah.
And then it's Al Franken, and then it's Sarah Silverman. It was rotated.
Yeah, I'd like to be in that locker room, when the coach is talking about how we're going to D up Brad Pitt and Clint Black and Sarah, those X's and O's.
Yeah.
I want to hear Phil Jackson talk about make Brad Pitt go left.
David, tell me, when did you meet Garry? It was when we were doing the Larry Sanders Show. I wrote the episode that you were on, and I think
Thank you.
The premise was that you were on the show and he didn't know who you were. For the first
that wasn't
meeting.
The premise. That was the truth.
Because you were on the X-Files, and Garry actually didn't really watch a lot of stuff. He didn't
watch the X-Files.
Yeah.
I know that.
But I remember once I was with Garry, he was getting interviewed by Howard Stern for the E! Interview show, and then Garry talked to this singer, God, I'll never remember his name either. And then Garry talked for like 15 minutes, and the second he walked out, Gary's like, Who's that? Who's that? Who was I just talking to?
No.
Richard Marx.
No, I talked to my agents and I said I wanted to do two things in my hiatus that year. I wanted to be on SNL and I wanted to be on Sanders, and because I was obsessed with, I would get the VHS tapes up in Vancouver where I was shooting, and I'd watch them, and so they told me, oh yeah, you're gonna go on Sanders, and Garry loves you. That's what they said. Garry loves you. And so I got there, and it was a scene like this. It was the talk show part. I got there early, and I was sitting in the audience kind of in the back watching Garry do a fake interview with somebody. And he got up and walked around a couple times around the whole audience, and he walked by me and clearly had no idea why I was there or who I was. So then time passed, and we went to do a scene in the hallway. And we met, and we did the scene. And I tell you this in all sincerity, and I don't know if I've ever told you, but because it was very moving to me at the time. And we did a take, and Garry he said, cut, and he kind of looked at me like, he said, how old are you? And I said, 33. And he said, what took you so long?
Wow.
And it was like, yeah, I just felt like, wow. That was a beautiful moment for me.
Yeah. Let's take a look at a piece of an episode with you and Garry. Now, you had an interesting
You'll see what took me
arc.
so long.
You had an interesting arc because it was like a man crush type of relationship on the show.
Yes.
Did that reflect life, or how did that come about?
No, I don't remember exactly how it came about, but I said, I think it's funny. It would be funny if I had a crush on you, but it wasn't sexual. And he said, that doesn't make any sense. And I said, but I think it's funny. I think it's funny. Like, what, I think it's funny. And he said, okay, well, we can do something like that. And then, and we did that first one, and then it was actually, the Golden Globes or whatever. I had to be in a hotel, and he came over to visit, and I was in a robe. Yeah. After the award ceremony, I was getting ready for bed. I was in a robe, and then I said, "Wouldn't it be funny if I, did the Sharon Stone thing?" Yeah. So, but that was the thing with Garry, as you know. Well, like you would just pitch shit at him, and some of it would stick, and he would know what would work. And
yeah, he was open to any great idea. So let's take a look at the clip number one here.
Hey, could you give Larry and I just a minute?
Oh, yeah, certainly.
Thanks. You're not upset that I'm taking Carol to the beach, are you?
Don't be silly. Of course not. She's a nice girl.
Oh, good. Well, I'm sorry I'm not going to be on the show with you.
What are you talking about? Me?
My agent called, said the network went ballistic, and they put me back on with Jon Stewart.
God damn it. Shit.
Wow,
They're just not supposed to do that.
you're upset.
God damn it!
God, you're really upset, aren't you? You really care about me, don't you? Are you uncomfortable?
A little bit.
Okay. I'll see you.
See you later.
Bye.
So when we were doing the last episode of the series, one of the premises was that he was trying to have the best final episode, and it was a lot about booking the final episode. And this next clip is Larry visiting you, trying to get you to do the final episode of the Larry Sanders Show.
There he is.
Hey.
Hey, how you doing? Come on in.
Good to see you.
Good to see you, too. God, you look great.
Thank you.
Your hair looks great.
Tay here?
The whole thing. Tay, she went golfing.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, that's fantastic.
Yeah.
You look great.
Thanks, so do you. I mean,
Appreciate it.
whatever you're doing.
Yeah.
You working out?
A little bit.
What's up?
You're not going to believe this. So we have this big, final show tonight, and Kevin Costner drops out.
Oh, shit.
And it's the last night of the show, so would it be imposing to ask you if you would do the show?
You know, I've actually been wanting to be on the last show very much, and I'm glad that you finally asked me.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Hey, I heard you got rid of Stevie Grant.
Did.
Yeah.
His behavior was so detestable.
Is that a word?
What'd I say?
You said his behavior was detestable.
Did I? I meant despicable.
Yeah.
Hey, can I have some fruit?
Yeah.
Appreciate
Oh.
it.
You've never seen Larry Sanders with people.
I haven't.
That's exciting, wasn't it? That was fun.
It's super exciting.
It is funny. We never knew it was funny before.
Can I bring you all to my house?
Yeah. How was it shooting with Garry? Because that last episode was very intense, because it was almost like Garry was having a little bit of a mental break because he was ending the show.
Yeah.
And it was a long final episode. And right before we shot that scene, Garry started melting down about the last scene of the show, which was like this 8-page scene between him and Rip Torn and Hank, where they just talk about everything. And he just goes into the writer's room and he's like, let's just cut it in half right now. Let's just cut it in half. And I'm like, Garry, it'll literally take us for 3.5 hours to figure out how to cut it in half, just to shoot it. And that'll be enough. And we'll cut it in post. And then they went, and him and Jeffrey and Rip shot the last scene in one take.
Yeah.
And then looked at each other and like, yeah, that was it. And they just walked away. And it was pretty wild. The whole week was weird because there was a moment where he said goodbye to the audience. He did a very like Johnny Carson-like looking to the camera, thanking them for all their years watching the show. And the crowd was filled with extras, and it's people you pay to be in the crowd. And they just were there like dead. And Garry just started yelling at the crew, just like, why the fuck do we have these people here? They're staring at me like fucking skeletons. What is this? He's like, get him the fuck out of here. I'll do it with no one there. Get him out of there. And he's really having a hard time because the show is ending and it's his whole life.
Right.
And then he did it again. He did looked into camera and had this very emotional scene. But it was that last episode, it's scary when you do a last episode because you're really going for greatness on the last one. And Garry said, let's try to get Jim Carrey to do it. And we had been trying for 6 years to get Jim to do it. He would put it off. And I called Jim. I'm like, Jim, you can't put it off. I mean, this is like, it's over. And he's like, okay, I'll do it. But you just have to promise me that I'll be the best guest star that's ever been on the show. And he had that funny run, Jim, which is Garry was, Larry Sanders is ending his show. And Jim's kissing his ass like, you're the best. Oh my God, thank you. And then they cut to commercial and Jim's like, what are you gonna do now? Movies? I'll destroy you.
Yeah.
Was it fun to do the show with Garry, like to act with Garry?
Oh yeah. I mean, as you know, he was so tortured about his own performance and his own writing. So there was always a sense in which, that I wouldn't want to take care of him. Like his feelings. I wanted him to take care of me. Yeah. Like guest starring like in his world. So it's like you were always very aware that he was continually questioning.
Yes.
Every take, every line, every moment was and that's the wonderful thing. That's why.
Have you met other people like that?
Have I met other people like that?
Who are tortured like that and obsessive? And he's a genius, so it's not like he's wrong for judging it, but it's really obsessive.
Yeah. I guess I've worked with some obsessive people, but none as seemingly harsh on themselves as Garry was.
Yeah.
And it was distressing because you wanted to say, "You're amazing. I love you. What you're doing is phenomenal."
Yes.
And as we talked about before, his scripts were just. There were mazes of notes. Every line, every page of the script was just covered in his acting notes and notes to himself. And there's just no way you could put all that shit in that. There was 5 hours of notes on this one page of dialogue. And it's like you just wanted to, when he would let loose, then there'd be a different mode that would happen. And you wanted to see that as well.
Yeah. I met him when I was a kid. I wrote jokes for the Grammys for him. was when I first met him, and it was the first night of the Gulf War, and someone said, Garry needs jokes. And I'm like, oh shit, I better write a lot of jokes for Garry, because I wanted to get in with him. I wanted him to like need me. And so I wrote like 100 jokes. And then the next day we went over the jokes, and for every joke, he didn't like the punchline, but he liked the setup. Because he didn't really know anything about music. And I would say, oh, we should do something about, Metallica. And he'd be like, who's Metallica? And then I would explain the band, and then he would write a better joke for it. And I think he just liked that I could provide that service. And I seemed to be writing down everything he was saying. I felt like my typing was why I got there. And so I guess he thinks I'm doing a good job. So he says, I'll take you to New York to be at the Grammys. And I've never done anything. And now we're rehearsing, and I'm, Bruce Springsteen is there. I'm like, Garry, we gotta take a picture with Bruce Springsteen. He's like, I'm not taking pictures with people. I'm like, Garry, let's take a picture with Bruce Springsteen. And so I have this like really creepy picture of me and him and Bruce Springsteen. Both of them look so unhappy to be in the picture with me. Jody Watley's in the background. And so that we're rehearsing, there's rehearsals, and it's so exciting. One day we sit with Dennis Miller, who's helping us write jokes. And Dennis Miller says, you should do something about Sinead O'Connor. You should say, that girl is stressed. I'm beginning to think she pulled her hair out. And then he instantly had this look in his eyes like, shit, I shouldn't have given that to Garry. That was a keeper. But all of it was as exciting as it gets.
Yeah.
And so after the show, REM is there. And I said to Garry, you should ask them to be on the Larry Sanders Show. And he's like, I don't ask people directly. There's people who do that. I'm not walking up to a band. I'm like, Garry, you just killed. You're like the big man tonight. They'll definitely say yes, and that would be incredible. He's like, fine. And this is what happened. REM's walking. Garry's like, hey,
REM.
Hey, if you guys want to be on the Larry Sanders Show, we'd love to have you. And Michael Stipe does this. Or I can go fuck. And then Garry was so mad at me for making him ask. And then at the party, Peter Buck's like, oh, I know, he's such an asshole. Michael Stipe is a nightmare. I'm so sorry. But that's when I got to know Garry, and Garry was, the first person to talk to me about Buddhism and spirituality. He started giving me these books. The first one he gave me was a book called How to Turn Problems into Happiness. And the premise was like a very simple premise. It was just, when something bad happens, you should just be grateful that you have an opportunity to fix something about yourself. So if something bad happens, you might learn patience or gratitude or fortitude or something. And I as a non-practicing Jew, just because my parents, the only religion I had as a kid was my mom would say, nobody said life was fair. That was all. That was the whole religious lesson of life. It was very impactful to have someone to say, hey, here's a spiritual idea that you could use in your life. And did you have those talks with Garry about Buddhism and his beliefs?
Meditation. He was always meditating. And I went and I meditated in his house with him and a monk once.
Yeah, how was that?
It was odd.
Who won? Who won the meditation?
Well, when I first took Garry to yoga.
Yeah.
I guess I introduced Garry to both yoga and boxing, which is an odd combination to have introduced him to. And I took him to yoga, and we came out, and I said, how'd you like it? And he said, I think I beat the woman next to me. Which I thought was funny. And we boxed in Bob Dylan's gym in Santa Monica, which is underneath a synagogue. So there's possibly a boxing gym under this right here.
John Prine is underneath here boxing.
And he used to say that he took a wrong turn, he made a left, but he took out the rabbi in 3 rounds. Yeah.
So you told him about boxing. He got very obsessed with boxing.
He was obsessed with
To
boxing.
the point where, like, on stage doing stand-up, he would do this, and we're like, what is he doing? But what do you think he liked about boxing?
Well, I think it was his own fear. Like, there was a certain amount of physical fear that he was confronting, and there was the sense in which, I mean, any boxer will tell you that you're fighting against, like, the ultimate version of your opponent. Like, in your mind, the other person knows all your weaknesses, knows exactly where you want to be, and is going to hit you in that spot.
Yeah.
So I think he was interested in that kind of projection, from himself, of his own shadow and his own fear, and trying to overcome that and to see into others. Not in a violent way, because he wasn't really into the hitting part of it.
Yeah. He liked the presence of it, that you have to be present if someone's trying to punch you in the face.
Yeah, he liked that, and he liked the courage, I think, because I think he had, questions about his own courage sometimes, as we all do, and I think being in the ring maybe answered some of those for him. I remember I was his corner man once, and it was ridiculous because he was supposed to fight a guy, kind of his age and stature, but that guy fell asleep or something and didn't make the fight. So they brought in this kid who was like 6'4", and he was in great shape. And Garry came back from the first round, and he was breathing so hard, he was kind of like, there was flecks of saliva coming like a horse. and all I could say was, "This is a situation."
What happened in the next round?
I don't know. It was, we weren't really hitting each other in the face. I mean, it was all body shots. So, he wasn't in danger of getting hurt. And the other guy knew that he was younger and bigger, and,
But he was an athlete. He was
a better athlete than you'd imagine.
Yeah, and he was a good basketball player.
And a great ping pong player.
Yeah, weirdly great ping pong player. Now, one thing I noticed, when I was going through all of his stuff is his brother had cystic fibrosis and died when Garry was 10 and his brother was 13. And his brother had this pen pal in Japan. So this is like 1958, 59, when that was a big deal to know someone in Japan. And then when Garry's brother died, Garry took over the pen pal relationship. And then at some point during high school, he came and spent a semester with their family. And in the photos, you start seeing Buddhas and things. And I always wondered if that's where he learned about Buddhism. I feel like you talked to Garry way more than me. I had a little bit of almost like a father-son relationship at times with Garry, but I would assume in his life and just his daily problems and his relationships, you probably had more of those conversations.
Yeah, I mean, I think, Garry would get obsessive about certain things, and I think he processed it with all his friends, and he would go round and round on certain things. But his advice was, I can't remember any of it, but it was always good. I mean, it's practical advice, which he wouldn't listen to for himself.
Yeah, that was the key to the whole thing. He gave great advice and liked to give advice.
Yes, he did.
And was terrible at taking any advice.
But the way he would not take your advice, and it was the same across the board, and I'm sure he said this to you 1,000 times if he said it once, was, "Judd, your instincts are right. Your instincts are right on.
Yeah.
And then I'm not going to listen to you."
Then he had a whole run of a page where he was trying to write jokes about, I have a hospital bed. And then he was just writing every possible joke you could be, I have a hospital bed in my house. I have a hospital bed in my house. I have anesthesia if I need it. I have, there are nurses ready to save me. Right. And he would just list every possibility for it. But he really was an amazing joke writer. And a lot of his jokes have become almost generic jokes because they were perfect jokes. Like he wrote the joke, I have a mirror above my bed which says, "Objects in mirror are larger than they appear."
Right.
See, it's hacky now, but in 1978.
Right. Yeah. But as you know, and what I think I learned from him, and I'm sure you did too, was the jokes for him came from character. I mean, that was the important part. So when he was writing drama or comedy or writing dramatic stuff, it was the funny's coming from the character. And if it's just a joke, he's not going to go for it. It's got to be the joke from that guy or the joke from that woman.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
That's a perfect intro to our number 3, jokes. We have a little video of some of Garry's jokes.
Oh, we do?
Yeah. This is well produced this night, David. I know you don't realize that I prepared.
I know I must sound like your mother. You're not married. Why not?
Well, you know, this is what I talk about currently on stage. I mean,
Do you think they're identifying with it?
you want to know the truth? Listen, I'm still using it to find out about truth and myself, and I go out and I talk about these things to an audience, and I'm still wondering if everybody's going through these things, if I'm going through them alone, if all relationships are difficult. So now I find it interesting where the audience connects and where they don't. And it seems that we all pretty much have the same problems.
They connect by their laughter.
Yes. As long as I've been doing stand-up, I've talked about dating. Now I'm involved in a relationship because I figured, hey, what could be worse than dating? So, no, and I'm very loyal in a relationship. You know, any relationship. Even when I go out with my mom, I don't look at other moms. You know, I don't go, ooh, I wonder what her macaroni and cheese tastes like. Even when I'm playing with my friend's dog, I feel like I'm cheating on my dog. I swear to God, I feel like I come home with there's dog hair all over me. My dog goes, where the hell have you been? You go, I was at the barber shop. This is human hair. I swear. All right, I threw the ball once. And I'm trying to make this relationship work because, you know, I think that's the key to the whole thing. You know, I think you date for a while, you're in a relationship, eventually in your life you have to get married because you just have to at some point in your life. You have to. That's how I feel. That's probably what I'll say at the ceremony. I'll probably go, I have to. No, it's I do, Garry. No, I have to. Trust me, it's an internal pressure. I'll explain it to you at the reception. A friend of mine said, you should get married, Garry. You'll get a lot of new comedy material out of it. That's a huge risk. What if I don't? Then what? Honey, not one funny thing in 10 years, honey. Not one funny thing. I'll be suing on those grounds, you know? Your Honor, she hasn't said a funny thing in 10 years. Garry, I've seen your act. You'll get everything. And it's not like marriage doesn't present its own set of problems. I mean, I had a friend of mine got married, and he called me up, and he says, my wife pays more attention to the new baby than she does to me, all right? I said, it seems to me you got to understand the baby is a blood relation to your wife, right? I mean, that's her son, basically. You're some guy she met in a bar, all right? She knows it, the kid knows it. I'm sure they have a good laugh about it when you're at work. Any questions to this point?
Maybe we should open it to questions. That's the transition. See how we produce that?
Questions, yes.
Anyone have a question they want to ask? Right there.
He's so successful in television.
Why didn't Garry translate to film? You want to take that one?
Oh, yeah. It's hard to say. It's very hard to say. I would argue that he did, and the audience didn't follow or find him. You know, it wasn't really anything to do with Garry's work. I mean, maybe the right project didn't happen. I think What Planet Are You From was just kind of a misfire in a way.
Yeah, Garry had this idea that he wanted to do a movie about a guy sent to Earth to impregnate a woman, and it's part of a scheme to take over the planet. And then the joke is that when he gets to Earth, it's really hard to get anyone to have sex with him. And so he has to get in a relationship with someone in order to impregnate them, and so he has to learn about relationships to pull off the mission, which is kind of a great idea. At some point in the process, it just the tone wasn't exactly Gary's tone. It's hard to know exactly why it didn't work. It should have been probably a grittier movie, and it was kind of a glossy, goofier comedy.
Big studio comedy.
And he hired Mike Nichols to direct it, and that's everyone's dream, to work with Mike Nichols. We all worship Mike Nichols, and Garry had a certain process, which is he would be tortured. He would rewrite constantly. He would rewrite on the set all day long. And I think Mike Nichols was just not up for that. I think he probably wanted an easy gig. He was collecting a huge check. And people have said to me that, and I don't know if this is accurate, but someone said to me that Mike Nichols was kind of like Garry, but found a way to present to the world that he was this very dignified, intellectual guy. And that when he looked at Garry, maybe he saw what he really felt like on the inside, this kind of tortured, neurotic Jewish man. And that there was something about Garry that really bugged Mike Nichols. And after the first day of shooting, he watched the dailies and he just decided that Garry wasn't a star and it wasn't working. And he just mailed it in and rapped every day at 4:30 and didn't let Garry do a lot of takes. And Garry felt abused. He didn't understand even what was going on. He just was like, this guy wants to go home every day by 5 o'clock and I want to fix the script. And he keeps telling me the script is perfect. And it's a nightmarish situation for Garry. And in his journals, he wrote about it. And what I think was beautiful about Garry is in his journals, he said, this is not going to work out and you can't torture yourself. You just have to go through the process and hope it's okay. And that is what happened. And then I think it made him afraid to try again after that.
And I think he really wanted to be a different kind of actor. Once he had finished the show, he really wanted to transform himself, be a transformative type of actor, and not hide his feelings, but hide within a character, and not be close to what Garry or Larry was. He wanted to be that kind of actor, and that was just his path. That's what he was going after. So he wasn't necessarily pursuing the kind of success that you may associate with him in television. In the film afterwards, he was kind of pursuing his own vision of himself as an actor, and not as a star or not as a popular thing. I think is that fair to say?
Well, it's hard to know because you might say he really mined his soul in his 2 TV shows, and he didn't have a lot more to offer at that time. I remember I asked him if he wanted to follow up the Larry Sanders Show with a show where he plays a billionaire. And I said, we should do a show where you're like Sumner Redstone or Rupert Murdoch and you live at the beach and you're single and you own both like a movie studio and the news. Like you own everything, but you're just kind of alone at the beach. And I sent him all the biographies of all the titans of media. And he's just like, nah, I can't. I'm just too tired. Yeah. And he was also getting sick. He had a thyroid problem that he didn't know he had. And so it's hard to know why he didn't do more, because he was having a medical problem that he wasn't aware of that was slowing him down. And he was also beaten down a little bit by the lawsuits that we talk about in the documentary. But it is sad because he was so funny, and when you would bring him a script and go, hey, what's wrong with my script? He knew, and he could fix it and tell you. And I think he enjoyed that because there was no pressure in fixing my script. He didn't have to worry about the world judging it. But if it was his work, it was life or death.
Well, right after the show ended, we tried to work on a script together, like he wanted to write something, and I would show up at his house, as you know, and then hours would go by and we wouldn't do anything, And after about 3 months of that, I just said, well, I'll just have to do something on my own, and whatever. But we had 2 really fun ideas. One was about a middle-aged guy who for some reason has to check into a retirement village, and he becomes like the stud of the retirement village. And that would have been him, I think. And the other was where he was, this might have been an idea that you guys were working on, where he dies and goes to God, and he's having his interview with God, and God says, well, you're kind of a scumbag. You did this, and you did that, and you did, and this is before, I think it's before Defending Your Life. And the Garry character says, what are you talking about, God? When was the last time you were down there? Do you know what it's like down there? You think I'm a bad guy? I'm a good guy. He says, go down there and see what you can do. So God goes down into the world and, becomes a drug addict and starts and stuff like that. So that was like the two ideas that we were supposedly working on, but we never got any work done.
Yeah.
He was just, I think he was, honestly, either he was burnt out or he just didn't want to fucking work with me.
Yeah. He just wanted to talk with you for 3 months.
Yeah.
And so at some point he started doing stand-up again. He was trying to figure out a new way to do stand-up, but he was still, having health difficulties. So I would do these shows at Largo, and I would just bring him on stage, and we would just talk, and he would be funny and sometimes tell some jokes that he wrote, and then he got more into it and started writing more jokes. And this is a little compilation of some late Garry jokes.
So what's going on with you? Because 64 is still very super young. Like, why don't you get up on that stage,
I think that may be what I do this year. As you grow, you have to find a new purpose and intention for doing what you do, or you won't grow. So I'm in the midst of exploring my intention for going on stage.
It's Judd and Garry Shandling!
Garry, I used to look much younger than you, and I feel like we look close in age now.
Well, I looked in the mirror the other day, and I swear to you, I thought, my God, I'm turning into Garry Shandling. And I did not see that coming, Judd. I just did not see that coming, and that's the truth.
I was doing a lot of sets with him at Largo, and he would come on stage, and he really was trying to be present and almost wasn't as concerned with the ideas as much as something happening. And it's like he didn't care if he had all the jokes. He wanted moments to happen on stage, and he loved the idea that they didn't laugh at all, then got home and slowly put it together.
I'm sitting there watching CNN when they break in and say Robin Williams passed away, and I was frozen. I mean, really frozen. It's horrible. And then Wolf Blitzer says, 63 is so young. And I looked up in hope for a second. And I realized they don't say 63 is young except when somebody passes away. They don't say 63 is so young to be still in the NFL.
It was like he had to reinvent the form to do it again. And he didn't know how he would reinvent it, but he knew he was not going to do what he did before.
You've known me for so long, and so it's been hard for me to decide if I want to go back on stage or not back on stage. And this is like splitting the difference.
Yeah.
I'm so happy to see you, really. I don't get out much. I'm a stay-at-home comedian. And that doesn't mean I'm not any less funny than the comedians who get out and work the clubs. If I was a woman right now, you'd be going, well, good for you. Good for you. You're a stay-at-home comedian. That's work. I'm still single. I've been single my whole life. eHarmony just matched me up with a gun.
That's kind of a perfect joke, isn't it? Yeah. eHarmony just hooked me up with a gun. Any other questions?
How much fun was it to work with Garry and when you directed and you wrote on Holiday Beyond?
Yeah. Well, I'd written this X-Files episode where they're making a movie of a case that Mulder and Scully investigate. So the actors playing Mulder and Scully in the movie version were Garry and Taya Leone, who I was married to at the time. And so they were playing Mulder and Scully in the movie. And as I was saying to you backstage, we're shooting the teaser, the first part where Gary's in action. He's fighting these zombies. It's this goofy, thing. So he's got a gun and he's firing over his head. Boom, boom, boom. He's an action hero. And Gary's very uptight and it's, he's doing fine, but I can tell he's not comfortable. And I was talking to him, and he said, I'm not this guy. I'm not a guy with a gun. I'm not an action hero. It's like, getting back to your question a little bit. He goes, I'm not Bruce Willis. And I said, Bruce Willis isn't Bruce Willis. It's like, you can just go out there and point that thing around, and it's going to look fine. And it was was about his process of truth, really. Like he couldn't fake that. If he didn't feel it, if he couldn't find his way to it honestly, spiritually, artistically, whatever, if he could not see himself doing that honestly, then he was going to be uncomfortable acting it, and he wasn't going to just fake it. Or he would, because he knew there was time constraints, we were going to have to shoot the scene, but he wasn't ever going to be comfortable in it. And it was heartbreaking and beautiful, and I appreciated it. I didn't share his concern, you know. I didn't see it from the outside looking in that it looked that bad, you know. But he felt it from the inside looking out. So it was wonderful to spend time with him, to work with him, to act with him. It was also heartbreaking and wonderful in all the ways it is to direct these imperfect beings that we get involved with, these actors, you know, and they come in with all their shit.
Yes.
You know, their insecurities and shit like that.
Are,
take it away, Judd.
What's that? Take it away. Well, people, you know, are interesting because they're, you know, complicated and wounded, and I think a lot of people who've been through things are emotionally tuned in, and they feel a lot and are able to express that in ways that other people aren't. So you wind up working with a lot of brilliant people like Garry, you know, who is just a big ball of everything.
And it's all intertwined. It's like you can't just say, hey, give me the Garry that gives me this.
Yeah.
You get the whole Garry, you know, and that's the best people are like that. And I remember we shot a scene where he and Taya fall into a casket, and then you know, they're going to share a kiss. Mulder and Scully in the movies are finally going to kiss, and I shot this scene, and then we show the scene in the premiere. So now I haven't looked at the clip on a big screen. I've only seen it on the monitor.
Yeah.
And we've got it up, and I've chosen the moment. And when it's how big is the screen? When it's 80 feet wide, as Garry pulls away, there's this strand of spittle. And it's only a 5-second clip, and the audience, which was bigger than this in a premiere movie theater, we watched, you know, as you know, we watched that clip 100 times, and every time that spittle came, like there was that same reaction, you know.
And did you CGI out the spit?
No, I don't think so. I don't think we could afford it back then. You've CGI'd out spit?
Well, my wife shared a kiss with Matthew Broderick and the Cable Guy, and not just a spit, but a spit bridge.
Well, that's what it was. It was
the Verenzano spit bridge. And I was like, oh my God, Bueller's spit in your mouth.
How much did that cost you?
No, I had to switch takes.
It was worth it.
It was not removable. It was so enormous. Garry and I, when we would work at Larry Sanders Show, we generally got along well. But one of the only fights we got into was he wanted to do something about Larry Sanders at Christmas. And I went, but he's a Jew. He's like, how do you know? I'm like, are you serious right now? I never said Larry was a Jew. Larry Sanders isn't necessarily a Jewish name. I'm like, Garry, you're the Jewiest man in the world. You think Larry Sanders isn't a Jew? And he got so mad at me. And I didn't even understand. I'm like, what's happening right now? Are we really having a conversation about if he could not be a Jew? But then Garry was so funny and smart that he just put that in the show, that he wouldn't admit he was a Jew. And then he just put it in the show. And then someone said to Rip Torn in the show, what religion is Larry? And Rip Torn goes, he's a talk show host.
He's a what?
He's a talk show host. And then in a later episode, Stiller called him. This is like 2 seasons later. Stiller is like going, fuck you, you self-hating Jew. And Garry goes, you think I'm Jewish? The other fight we got into was about, I wrote an episode where Larry has to leave and Hank has a new girlfriend and she leaves her kid with Hank, and when she comes back, Hank has her kid on a leash. Right? And Gary's like, that's too broad. And I'm like, Garry, have you been to the mall? Like, people have kids on leashes. It's like a weird thing. And he's like, no, it's too much. I'm like, Garry, have you ever left the house? This is not like so broad. I mean, it exists in the world. And it makes sense that Hank would be lazy and like tie the kid to his desk or something. And we just got in such a big fight about it. And then like years later, he was doing the DVD extras.
Yeah.
And we shot this thing for it. And I said, the writers would get mad at you because sometimes you would reject good ideas. And he's like what? I'm like the leash. And on the DVD, we have the fight about the leash, and he gets so mad at me again as if it was that day. But he was very hard to write with because it was like trying to paint with Picasso. It's like if you had to paint with Picasso, at some point Picasso would be like, what the fuck are you doing on your side? What is that? And that's how it felt writing with him. Like, he's a genius, and I'm just trying to not make him mad because the bar is so high and the work is so personal. There's no way to really know what he would think about any type of the behavior because it was specific to his mind. So a lot of writers, would get very frustrated. Half the writers just knew he was a genius and were like, I don't care if this is hard because I get to be around this guy. And the other half were like, fuck Garry. And that's what the writer's room was like. There were a lot of people who were mad, and we would have a debate. Would you rather work with a genius who's a nightmare or someone who was mediocre but was really nice to be around? And then one guy, said, I'd rather work with, someone that's hard to be around. And that guy actually had just worked at The Cosby Show. So let's.
But as you say, it's so personal that he wouldn't. He wasn't an easy mentor in that way sometimes because if you didn't get it, he just assumed you were never going to get it.
Well, it was also that if you didn't get it on some level, it felt like he thought you were trying to destroy him.
Right. That was
which
personal.
is a different type of thing. And I think for some people, their self-esteem is so tied into the success of their creative work that when you mess up or you can't support it in the way that they need, they have a fight or flight response and they really feel like you're trying to ruin their entire life. It's not just a joke or a story. Anyone else, sir? Yes, sir.
What is the mission of the book?
The question is basically, what's the point of writing the book? And it's probably just an expression of grief and hoarding. Garry taught me so much that on one level I thought it would mean a lot to Garry for all those lessons he tried to teach me and other people to exist in a form where forever, if someone picked up the book, that they could learn the things that his friends learned from him. And it's also, I think, like when you're sad, you don't want to end the relationship. So it's like talking with Garry all day long, putting together the documentary and the memorial. That's why I'm working on a CD-ROM right now.
Yeah, a hologram.
I know, I want to open up for Garry's hologram all across the nation. But when I went through all his stuff, I just thought, this is incredible. And as a comedy fan, when I was a kid, I used to look at this book. It was called The Marx Brothers Scrapbook. And I thought, wow, I wish this was laid out in a way for people to see, because some of it is really funny. It's also an oral history of Garry. And then there's these journals where, throughout his life, and I don't know if he learned this in like a self-help class or something. Sometimes I think that that's what happened. His journals aren't him bitching, because a lot of times people lately write in journals to get the dark stuff out of your head. I mean, that's what I was always told. Write down the shit that's bothering you before bed, you'll sleep better. But that's not what Garry was doing. Garry was...
Who gave you that advice?
Burgess Meredith.
It sounded like him.
Kid, you gotta get a journal.
Oh, you were talking about photos before? I have this strange... Maybe you can explain it to me, but I have a photo, or I've seen it in your book. It's me, Jon Stewart, and Charles Nelson Riley.
I just thought, how often does that happen?
Never.
And like, to me, I wanted people to see that there was a moment where Garry, Duchovny, and Charles Nelson Riley hung out.
Jon Stewart.
And Jon Stewart. So what I noticed in the journals was he was always saying positive things to himself, almost like he was trying to connect with his higher voice. So instead of just bitching, most of his journal was, on one page it says, let go, drop the story, give what you didn't get, give more, love more. And I just thought, that's so beautiful. I think if I was, a young person, I would have never thought that that's how my mind was supposed to work and that it could really impact people, that existed somewhere. So that's the other reason why I put it together. Anyone else? Can I get a copy of the book? I wanted to read something from it, but I don't even have a copy. There's a bunch of things in here. You've kind of gone through it, deeply, but there were a few things that I found somewhat astounding in his notes that, I just thought that it was so different than the way comedians think. So this is from 1977. He's, at this point, not a good comedian. He's just starting out, and he's clearly scared. And so he's trying to figure out stage fright. And so he's just writing about stage fright to get over it. And so it says, thoughts. Stage fright is caused by not living in the now. It is caused by living in the future. Will I play my role well? Will I be liked? What will I say? Yet if I just get up and do whatever Garry Shandling would do, there's no reason to be anxious because whatever I do will be Garry Shandling. And that is who I am. I am who I am. There's no reason to be afraid of what people think because I am being me and all I have is me. What I do, who I am, is all I have. I do what I do. What the hell difference does it make what they think? What I think and am is my center. This is another one. It's just a weird observation for a comedian. He wrote, listening to Elvis today on the radio, I realize he can sing any song and it's still Elvis. The material doesn't matter, it's Elvis. People don't think, he's singing that song. Perry Como sings that. No one cares. No one realizes they want to hear Elvis. So it is with material. It doesn't matter if it's like someone else. It is merely a vehicle to be Garry. The more you're Garry and the less you worry about the song or your singing, the more you'll be yourself. Did you think like this as a young person?
I don't even understand it right now.
Yeah, it's really interesting. When he would go on the Tonight Show, he would psych himself up, and he would talk about, can I be present with Johnny? Like, can I be funny in the moment with Johnny? And he says, when you're on the Tonight Show, it says, Tonight Show in a couple of days, just be Garry. Don't let material clog up your head on panel. In a club, there's no pressure because you feel you can handle any situation and will come up with the material when you need it. Also, if you're willing to take a risk, there's no reason to sit at panel with Johnny if you're just gonna do jokes. It's not you. The reason you're doing this is to be yourself. Just relax and have fun. Which, I think is a lot like athletes. Athletes talk about like being in flow. Like when you see Michael Jordan, it's almost like he's not thinking. And Garry talks in the book about doing a simultaneous performance and non-performance. He's like applying Zen in the art of archery to sitting, talking to Johnny Carson and assuming that when the time comes, he'll just be funny and trust that will happen.
Yeah, well, I'm sure you had many conversations with Garry that had 20, 25-second pauses in them.
Yeah, he was a big pauser.
And he would just... And I guess he was trying to find that spot there, trying to find, I'm sure he was in touch with some reaction, but he didn't quite trust that reaction first, so he was waiting for the second one or the third or the 100th one.
Well, he kept saying like life is in the silences and that everyone is talking too much.
Yeah.
And I wanted to show a clip of him from the Comedians in Cars Garry did these DVD extras where he would interview comedians, and it inspired Jerry Seinfeld. It was one of the things that inspired him when he did Comedians in Cars, is they would do these funny interviews for Garry's DVDs years before. And it was really important to Garry when he did Comedians in Cars that he did well. And he wanted to express certain things he'd never expressed to the public before about his life. So this was a piece from Garry's Comedians in Cars. Seinfeld gave me all the raw footage, so we kind of re-edited it to expand on some things Garry was talking about.
David Brennan passed away last year. All that material, he worked so hard on it. It's just gone. It doesn't mean anything to anyone anymore. It took so much work to create it.
That material and your material is purely a vehicle for you to express your spirit and your soul and your being, and that's why you're fantastic. So you keep.
So it doesn't have any value beyond that?
It doesn't have any value beyond you expressing yourself spiritually in a very soulful, spiritual way. It's why you're on the planet. God, open up the sunroof. What year is this?
Because he was out of the limelight in a lot of ways, and people were wanting to know what he's doing, where was he, there was a lot of questions, and this was the forum to address all that stuff.
I'm so happy to see you. That's all this is about. It's so honest.
Well,
thanks.
there's a few things that the show is about, and one of them is friendship. Can you give me one more compliment?
I can.
That I came up with a show that is such a perfect format for guys like us, and particularly you. You know what, partly where I got it from? Our walk in Central Park that day doing DVD extras for the Larry Sanders Show. Man.
You evidently have not been watching my show, Comedians in Hospitals Getting Surgery. I thought of that last night.
Comedians in Hospitals Getting Surgery?
Yeah, because I was going to tell you, I was in the hospital getting surgery.
But if someone asked me, do you think Garry had that line, or you think he just said it in the moment?
That's why I'm sharing it.
I would tell you, I
can't tell.
I can't tell.
Yeah.
And I'm pretty good at this. But let me just say this. In the old days, you and I would take those walks. And those were little soul walks we took. We were both in the throes of handling these very challenging jobs that we had. And we were doing them at the same time.
This is part of the key of our relationship. And I've told you this before. I need to hear you say, it's a fucking minefield. Because when I say it's a fucking minefield, they go, Shandling's complaining. I don't know why that is.
Thanks, Garry. Thank you.
I'm telling you, the truth of us just talking right now.
Right.
I appreciate it.
Me too.
That's all that matters.
I agree.
Okay, buddy. It's like how many people can sit down and talk this way?
The guys who defuse the bombs, those two guys. You think when they sit down and have a cup of coffee, you think it's quiet a lot?
I think it's this. They're both shaking like that. Yeah. I went in to get a CT scan on last Wednesday, and I go in there, and the guy says, hey, Garry Shandling, I'm a big fan. He said, I did a CT scan a year ago of you. He said, do you have cancer? I said, no. And he said, oh, good, so you're still alive. He said, because I was watching the news, and it seems like if he had passed away, I would have heard about it on the news. And I said, well, I don't know, man. I mean, I don't know if they would have broken in or anything, but, I didn't know what to say to the guy. He kept at it, and he said, oh, so that's so great that Garry Shandling's still alive.
Yeah. It's, it's sad for us because Garry was just so sharp and so funny, and he was struggling in a lot of ways at the same time. So as a friend, you knew he was struggling, but you didn't really know exactly what was happening, if he was just emotionally having a hard time or he was sick because he had pancreatitis and thyroid issues. And so it's such a beautiful thing to see him express all that. And I think one of the reasons why I did the book and the documentary is I feel like these were the ideas that he wanted to share near the end of his life, that these ideas about spirituality and friendship, and that's why it's such a big deal that people have responded in such a big way to it, because I do think it's what he wanted to get out there.
Well, I think with the documentary that you did so beautifully, I think so many people would come up to me and say, oh, I saw that documentary about your friend, or, about Shandling. I had no idea. That was the constant refrain of what kind of a person he was, And I think you've done a great service as a friend, aside from, the service of making this book and sharing it with people, but you've done a beautiful act of friendship in the last couple of years, and it's stunning, actually.
Thank you. We'll take a couple of more questions, and then we'll move on with our lives.
What is a lesson you learned from Garry that you sort of taken and implemented in your own life?
What lesson have you learned from Garry that you have implemented in your own life?
Oh, gee, I don't know. Do you have one?
There's one that that's in the book that I quote a lot, but I'm always just surprised that he just wrote these things to himself. He's just alone writing these beautiful ideas. Just on a piece of paper, it just said this: maybe your comedy is a natural gift to be given to others with joy, to help them through this impossible life, and you sharing it with no desire of getting anything. That's a good one to think about.
Did you learn that?
I'm trying.
I think I always come back to that image. Garry had a ham radio set up as a kid, and he actually had it in his house as an adult. He had this big tower up in his house, and if you can imagine this possibly Jewish little kid in Tucson, imagine little Garry Shandling in Tucson, Arizona, and then imagine that kid, he gets on a ham radio because he wants to talk to the rest of the world. And I just think of that I just extrapolate from that for all of us, that we're all kind of operating, or, when I think about Garry, little Garry and big Garry, getting on that ham radio and talking to some trucker in India, some guy in China who happens to be on the radio. And it's like, well, that's really all we all are. We're just our singular voices trying to reach out, to other singular voices.
Well, I think he really felt like we're all connected, and the ham radio, which is something I think he did because he felt so engulfed by his mom after his brother died. Suddenly all eyes were on him, that he disappeared into his room and he would just talk to people around the world. And I think it's part of what his belief system was, which is we all need to be there for each other and love each other and help each other, or we're in trouble. We're fooling ourselves to think that we're not connected. And so part of dropping your ego, which is what he talked about all the time, and dropping your story, was to drop everything so that you could just, be love and be connection with other people. And I wanted to end this with just a clip of this weird moment where Garry and I are talking to the spiritual person, Ram Dass. And so Ram Dass, he was the person who wrote the book Be Here Now, and I guess he was doing a podcast or something, and someone asked me to be on it, and I said, hey, Garry, I'm going to talk to Ram Dass. You want to come talk to Ram Dass? And in the middle of talking to him, Garry just showed up at my house. And so in just some side room of my house, we're talking to Ram Dass for about 25 minutes, and it was really beautiful. And he said 2 or 3 things in this conversation that I try to focus on that really are life-changing. But I also thought, if you watch this, I've never seen Garry look happier. It just seems to confirm all of his beliefs, and he's really at peace when talking to Ram Dass. So let's take a look.
I wrote a joke that said, I can meditate to the point where my mind is blank, but then there's no one to blame. I did that joke on stage, and of course it's not really a joke. But then this is the luck of my life. Judd Apatow says to me, hey, I'm Skyping with Ram Dass tomorrow. Come on over.
Who's that?
That's Garry Shandling just popped in. Garry, lean in so we can see you there.
Do you have any clue who I am?
Yeah, I know who you are.
You look great. You just look great.
Thank you.
So I don't know what.
Gary just asked you that because he wants you to tell him how he looks.
You know, I've been meditating for 35 years, so I can meditate until my mind is pretty empty, pretty blank. But then there's no one to blame. Now I realize I have an audience for my meditation material.
Humor is great in spiritual work. It gets you there.
Yeah.
I'd say in here, not here.
Yeah.
Here is serious. Here is the judge. Here is the, down here, there's really humor down here.
Bodhisattva is no one is enemy.
No one is enemy.
No one. The true enemy is the ignorance.
The true enemy is the ignorance.
Yeah.
All my journey is to be authentically who I am, not trying to be somebody else under all circumstances.
Have you found confusion?
Sure, there isn't. The whole world is confused because they're trying to be somebody else. To be your true self, it takes enormous work. Then we could start to look at the problems in the world. But instead, ego drives it. Ego drives the world. Ego drives the problems. So you have to work in an egoless way. This egolessness, which is the key to being authentic, is a battle.
Everything is part of an ocean of love. Go within. There's loving awareness. Loving awareness. And there's no time in now. My body lives in time. My psychology lives in time, but I don't live in time. I live in this moment. This moment. This.
I understand.
Thank you guys for coming out. Thank you, David, for doing this with
for having me, Judd.
We'll be signing some books in the back. Really appreciate all your support for all things Gary. Good night.
David Duchovny, Judd Apatow, thank you so much for joining us here on the Talk House podcast. Huge thanks to Brian Kelly and everyone else at Murmrr, and also to Community Bookstore in Park Slope, Brooklyn. If you're in New York, stop by and pick up It's Garry Shandling's book at the store. They've been around since 1971, and it's beautiful. And if not, go to their website, pick it up there.
Yeah, which has probably not been around since 1971.
Probably 2001. Yeah.
Subscribe to the podcast. We have some amazing upcoming episodes, including, as Elliot mentioned at the top of the show, another episode from the Murmrr Lit series featuring George Saunders and Dana Spiotta. And Elliot, you've got some biggies coming up too, right?
Yeah, man, including the bands Robbie Robertson and His Golden Messenger.
It's been an amazing year so far. You know, we've had Dev Hynes from Blood Orange with Beverly Clint Copeland, Michael Shannon, Jason Narducci, Susie Quattro and DDT Sparks, Nick Thune and Damien Jurado. It's been stacked.
It really has, man. So listeners, feel free to subscribe and rate and review the podcast.
5 stars will be accepted.
Our researcher for today's show is Reese Higgins, and this episode was recorded by Justin Rabowski and our co-producer, Mark Yoshizumi.
The theme song for this episode and all episodes was composed and performed by The Range.
And for some fun pictures from this event, definitely check out @TalkHouse across social platforms. Till next week, I'm Ellie Einhorn.
I'm Nick Dawson.
Peace. And Garry Shandling.